Thank you for joining us today on the Perioperative Playbook, a Sullivan Healthcare Consulting podcast. Today, we're going to be talking to Shawn Craddock again, one of our senior consultants who spends a majority of his time in interim leadership positions. This is an excellent opportunity for organizations to engage with Sullivan Healthcare Consulting and one of the many services we provide. So, without further ado, we'll jump right into it. I'd love to reintroduce Shawn Craddock. Shawn, can you give us a little bit of your background, just super high level for me, please?
Yeah, super high level. Like you said, I'm a senior consultant with Sullivan Healthcare Consulting. Across my career, I spent about 27 years as a nurse, about 25 of those in the operating room. And out of those 25, pretty much all 25 of them in some sort of leadership position, both in the military and in the civilian sector.
And like Shawn, I have about a decade in the military as a combat medic, as well as a few years as a consultant with Sullivan Healthcare Consulting. So you're going to be getting some interesting perspectives on this, and I'm excited to bring this episode to everybody. So in perioperative consulting, consultants don't necessarily only design strategy or help with key performance indicators or help with scorecards. There's a multitude of things that we can do outside of that, and one of them is interim leadership. Shawn, could you describe what it's like to walk into a brand new OR and take charge?
Sure, absolutely. I think to understand what that's really like, though, Stephen, we've got to talk about the week leading up to it. And so, you can't walk cold into a hospital, even though, I think the popular thought is that we do. We just walk in cold, we take charge, and we start moving things forward. But really, the week leading up to taking charge or coming into a new OR is really about studying the organization. The nice thing about having a consultant as an interim leader is we've already done on the other side of our business, we've done an assessment, we know the recommendations. And so, what I like to do the week before is I like to spend time reading our reports, our assessments, looking at our recommendations, and then talking to our internal leadership about, okay, where are they? What have they done? What have they not done? And then I also like to talk with the client and find out what they see the priorities as. And so, give me your top three. What do you want me to hit the ground and immediately start working on? And so I think that's key. So really, when you talk about the first 30 days, it actually starts the week before you get there. When you get there, it's hitting the ground. And the first thing I always like to do is meet the people. Who are the most important people in my life as an interim consultant? So I want to meet the director of EVS. I want to meet the director of materials management. I want to meet the chief of anesthesia, the chief of surgery. And then from there, start meeting, the leadership team, all of the staff, the surgeons, the anesthesiologists, the CRNA, so on and so forth. And so, really, that first couple days for me is just a very extended meet and greet. I'm trying to figure out who does what in the organization and how they do it, and how does that line up with what I've been given as my priorities. So that's really that first couple of days. And then from there, it's about going over the recommendations and starting to form any task force that you need. Do I need a turnover task force? Are we focused on first case on time starts? Like where are the hot spots based on the assessment and the recommendations? And really, I start to try to organize all of those things. Because again, when you have a consultant as an interim leader, it's different than when you just go out to one of the companies that provide interim leadership because again, we've done the assessment, we know the recommendations, and really, our position as interim leaders in the consulting world is we're coming in to help you make the changes that need to be made. Now, sometimes there's an implementation expert or consultant there with you. Sometimes it's just you, but we're looking at it from a different focus. We're not just trying to keep the seat warm until you find your next director or your next manager or whatever that may be. We're really trying to help propel the organization forward. So the rest of that first week is really what are the priorities? What data do I need? How do I form my task forces in order to get the right people at the table so we can start talking about what needs to be done? And then, one of the most important things you need to do is touching base with your client, be it, a vice president level person or the CEO, the president, whomever that is that brought you in to do the job. And just talking about here's what I've seen my first week. This is where I think we need to start. How does that line up with what you think? And so just trying to make sure that we're on the same page. The rest of that first 30 days is really starting to move things forward. It's determining what the priorities are, what the hottest spots are, Are there any patient safety issues? Are there any staff safety issues? Are there any physician concerns that could lead to patient safety issues? And really determining what those are and working those into the priority as well. Beyond that, it's really about getting stuff done. Okay, let's get these things started. Let's start working on the hot spots, the issue. Let's start building what the new plan looks like. What tools do I need to bring from my toolkit to implement it at whatever this location is? Who else do I need to get involved? Do I need to call a Steven Spake and say, hey, I need help figuring out X, Y, and Z? And so, the first 30 days, there's a lot of getting to know the organization, figuring out where you're going. But, the last 2 weeks of that first 30 days is really about, okay, we're going to move now and helping everyone understand that we're going to be doing this, creating that sense of urgency, getting people on board with what changes need to be made, and then moving forward with those.
Those are all phenomenal points. And you brought up a lot of really good points of contact and points of interaction with
Mhm,
people. Because I've done some of these with you, or I've been around you while you've done
mhm,
them, I know that you don't just look up when you talk about making contact with people. You're not just looking at the
right,
VPs, you're not just talking to the C suite. I've seen you, Army talk. I've seen you walk the line
mhm,
and talk with your scrub techs, your day shift, your night shift, your sterile
mhm,
processing technicians, your circulating nurses, your CRNAs. So I think that what you do in terms of talking to people at all levels is really impactful to how successful you are with these interim positions.
mhm,
In so much of what you're talking about doing, the driving the success, the pushing points of adjustment that could be made in the interim requires buy-in from the staff. And I'd be curious, not just within the healthcare industry, but in general, I think it's applicable. How do you generate that buy-in from all levels? Because if you're just up there on a hill waving a flag by yourself, it's not going to get anything done.
right,
Your credibility and expanding that credibility into all levels of staff is hypercritical for you to
mhm.
accomplish the goals that you have in this interim leadership period. How do you generate that buy-in?
So that's a really good question, Stephen. And honestly, I don't think a lot of people think about it this way, but I actually start with the leadership team. And what I like to do is find out, what are the hot spots in the staff? Who's going to give me the most resistance? Who's going to be my early adopters? Like, I want to understand from the leadership team where the staff are and how they've managed change in the past. And then after that, you're absolutely right. It's about making contact line people. Like, you've been around me. I even get to know the housekeeper that terminally cleans the ORs at night. I try to get to know everyone who's going to either make my life a lot easier or make my life miserable while I'm here. And so by doing that, hopefully they make my life easy and they want to work with you more. They put a face with a name. You're not just that consultant guy that runs around, in a suit or something. And I mean, much like you see me now, both podcasts that you and I have now done together, I've been sitting here in scrubs. So that's a key. So you've got to get out there and you've got to talk with the staff. And it's not, the first step of change management isn't necessarily managing the change, it's creating the urgency of why we need to change. And so to get staff on board with that, I try to take the time to explain to them what it is we're currently doing, what I've seen other places be successful. Because it's not a one size fits all in consulting. What we did at one client may not absolutely be the same way we do it at another client. We have to tailor it to that client. And so I like to find out from the frontline folks, where they're at with change management. What do they see as barriers? What's been done in the past? And so I think by starting there, it's easier to bring them on board when you start saying, okay, I need to form a task force about turnover time and I need staff participation on that because, I'm not the one that's turning over the room necessarily. Yeah, you'll see me back there with the mop, but I'm not in there every day turning those rooms over. And so, once you build a rapport with the staff by just talking to them, finding out where they are, and trying to help them understand what we're trying to do and creating that sense of urgency, then bring them to the table. They're the ones doing the work. Chances are they have ideas of how to make it better. But definitely, even if they don't have ideas, they know the barriers. And we don't necessarily know the barriers until we get in there and take a look around, do some time studies, all those things that we consultants do. Time studies, motion studies, who's doing what, when, and where, and how. Until we get in and we start doing that, we don't necessarily know the barriers, but the people on the front line know the barriers already. And most of the time, they're very willing to talk to you about what the barriers are. So you can try to help them. Yeah. The other thing I do, especially as a consultant in interim leadership, I go in with the attitude of, I'm here to help you. Yes, I have an agenda of things that I think we need to work on, but I'm also going to take some time to find out what you think we need to work on. And we're going to help you with that too.
Yeah, I would agree with you, especially on the point where there's usually never a shortage of people that want to give you an earful.
Right.
And I think it's important, both as a consultant and that interim leader, that you take that as impartially as possible.
Hmm.
There could be 7 different perspectives on the same hot topic. And on
Right.
that note, there's in my head, there's really 3 large relationship groups that interim OR directors have to manage, in the OR at least. There's nursing,
Hmm.
there's anesthesia, and there's physicians. And this
Yep.
is just in the OR, so SPD folks, we haven't forgotten about you. Materials management, we adore you. So please don't think that we're ignoring you. But those 3 relationship groups are incredibly important. And
Hmm.
I'd like to talk about each one of them a little bit. When it comes to physicians, how are you managing trying to balance their demands with the needs of the OR to be efficient and financially reasonable?
So that's a really good question. I think that's something that, early on in my leadership career I struggled with myself is, you've got the organization saying we want to do X. Normally it's something around driving down cost. We want to drive down cost. We want to try to standardize more products, all of those things. And then you've got the physician side, which is, look, I've been using this since I trained 24 years ago. I'm going to continue to use it, and you've got to find a way to bridge all those things. Focusing specifically on physicians for a moment, and it's such a simple concept, Stephen, but I see so many leaders getting it wrong. Just be honest with them. Tell them the things that you can tell them. And if you can't talk about it, or if it's an organizational taboo, or, if you don't have the right information to talk to them about it, just tell them that. Like, I'm not going to talk about this with you because this is not something the organization is focused on at the moment. We can be honest with them without throwing anyone under the bus, without having them mad at admin, or, because that's a surgeon pastime. It's being mad at administration. And so we can be honest with the physicians without going into that. The other thing about physicians that I learned very early on is, in God we trust, all others bring data. If you don't have data backing up what you say, it is meaningless to a physician, because we have to remember, especially as nurses, because nurses are taught completely differently than physicians are. Nurses are taught about history and about, you should know everything about the patient before you do anything. And physicians are, here's the problem, what do I need to do to fix it type of people. And so they revolve around data. I mean, even look at like publications. Physician publications has a ton of data in it. Nursing publications, not so much sometimes. And so you need data, you need to be honest, and you need to identify the things that when they come up, that you're not going to be able to work on with them. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not going to get to that while I'm here, but we'll make sure that that's on the list for the permanent director when they come. Or, that's not an organizational hotspot at this moment, but I'm gonna put it on the list. So I find if you're just open and honest with them and you tell them everything that you can, your relationship tends to be a lot stronger.
Yeah, I think one thing we could all agree on is that folks that work in and around the ORs are generally too smart to BS. So leading
Right.
through honesty and transparency is always going to get you further than anything else. All right, so that's physicians. Let's talk
Yep.
anesthesia. A hot topic for many a conversation on this podcast. What are some challenges that you face as an interim leader? I mean, we could be totally frank. Anesthesia as an industry has a multitude of challenges. Staffing is a huge
Yep.
one. Compensation is
Yes.
a huge one. Subsidies are a
Yes.
huge one. But as an interim director, some of that isn't necessarily your problem.
Right.
From my perspective, what you focus on every day is getting cases safely conducted and people
Mhm.
home within a range of tolerances to the end of their shift.
Yes.
From an interim leadership position, what are some of the challenges you face with anesthesia and how do you approach them?
Yeah. So number one, and this is many, many places I've been. Number one is always the anesthesia contract. There are now two basic methodologies for anesthesia for hospitals. You employ them, and then they're employees of the organization, or there's a contract. And I'm not going to say one's better than the other. It really depends where you are, what your goals are, and what you're trying to accomplish in the service you're getting. But, that's the big 2. They're either employed or it's a contract service. And now, the landscape of anesthesia has changed so drastically because now you have these super mega groups out there, of which I won't name any. And, they each have their pros, they each have their cons. But you have these super mega groups out there now over large areas or regions of the US. And really, the biggest challenge is the contract. Are the sites of service what you actually need? Do you have flexibility built into the contract to you know, not send everyone home at 3 o'clock if, Dr. X is running 40 minutes late? And then do you have adequate coverage for your add-ons? And so as an interim director, I'll just say the last 3 places I've been, that's been number one on the list. And, those last 3 places, that covers a couple of years now. So yeah, you've got to make sure that as an interim leader, you understand the contract, you understand the sites of service. You don't need to get into the compensation and the subsidies and do we pay for your CME and all those things? But you've got to understand the contract from the standpoint of how many sites of service do I have? What's my coverage if things run late? How does that work? Who do I need to talk to? And what happens if I'm not getting the service that the contract says? Which is a big one because when you're not getting the service as dictated by the contract, then what do you do? And not only interim leadership, but I see a lot of leaders fall down on this because, you hear them complaining about, well, anesthesia never gives me that fifth person that they said they're going to. Okay, well, what are you doing about that? Well, I don't know what to do. Have you read the contract? Because there's probably language in there around what happens if the contract's not being met by either party. And so I guess number one is know the contract, the pieces that you need to know. But then moving into the more personal side, get to know your chief of anesthesia. Get to know your chief CRNA if you have one of those. And, it's just like I said about staff. Just get to know them because if you build a good working relationship with them, you're going to help each other. So today may not have any add-ons, maybe, everything's ending by 3 o'clock. Hey, congratulations, everyone gets to go home. There's no need to stand here. Another day, it may be, look, I've got 3 rooms running past 3 o'clock, and I know I'm only supposed to have one, but I need some help here. And they're going to be more likely to work with you.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that. And relationship management is such a critical part of leadership, whether it's interim or not.
Yeah.
In the time I've been with Sullivan, I've come across all sorts of leaders looking at, senior leaders, even up to the C-suite, the ones with the most grounded and well-rounded opinions and thoughts related to their surgical services department know where the locker room is, know where the scrubs are, know where the charge desk is. Because I've encountered some that just don't. They have
Right.
these fully formed opinions on their perioperative services department, but haven't set foot in an OR in 15 years. And
Yeah,
I think it's so important for leaders and otherwise to be present in the areas they're trying to lead.
absolutely.
And then that,
Absolutely.
that segues right into that third group I wanted to talk about, which is our nursing staff. And we'll go ahead and lump the scrub techs into this one as well, but they're really your frontline employees in terms of
Mhm.
surgery and the largest group that you're likely to manage as that interim leader. What are some things that you find to be incredibly critical in your tenure as an interim leader to the success of that group? For
So,
example, anything from
yeah.
morale or, how do you manage morale? How do you navigate
Mhm.
travel staff? How do you prevent burnout? And unions are another obstacle sometimes,
Mhm.
occasionally an ally as well. But how
Yeah.
do you manage that as an interim leader?
So the first thing is all about communication. Again, it's just like the physicians. These folks are not dumb by any means. We have smart people in the operating rooms, and I'm not saying that the rest of the hospital isn't, but I think we have to recognize that we're working with intelligent, educated adults here, and so they sniff out the BS really easily. It's not like you can just go in there and give them some song and dance and they're going to buy it because you're the leader.
Well,
That's
I've seen
not
you
the way
dance.
it
They
works.
won't buy it anyway.
No, no, it's but rapping, they do buy my rapping. Just a quick aside, I was called into the room 2 weeks ago, and I was told physician X wants to see you in the room right now. So I go running back there. Oh my God, something's wrong. I walk in the room and I'm like, Doc, what's wrong? He goes, What do you mean? This isn't emergent. I just want you to come in and rap for everyone in here because they didn't believe you could.
Hey, you gotta find what gets you in the room, right? You
Oh,
you have
yeah,
to find
yeah,
the one
absolutely.
thing.
And although that's an aside and kinda comical, it does lend to the point that I'm trying to make, and that is, yes, you're the leader, and yes, everyone's gonna look to you for crisis management and look to you for your guidance and your leadership, and you have to be strong, but number 1 is be present. I can't stress it enough, but I can't tell you how many times I go into an OR, both as a consultant and back when I was a permanent director, how many times I go into an OR and I ask the staff, when's the last time you saw your leader here? When's the last time your leader was in scrubs? When's the last time your leader picked up a mop? And it's shocking the answers you get. It ranges everything from I have a leader to you mean that guy in the suit that's in the meetings all the time? Yeah, yeah, no, he's never been back here. And it's not only OR directors and OR managers though. It's also the senior leadership team. I know when you have 8 hours of meetings a day, all of those things are really difficult to manage. But, I've been there and I've done it and I was still in the OR every day. May have only been for 10 minutes some days, but I was there. I let people see me. I talk to them. I find out what's going on. And, the biggest thing with staff is building that, I call it a personal work relationship because I want to know how your kids are doing. You know, I know when your family's going through a hard time. I have an employer right now as an interim that his aunt died 3 weeks ago. And so the first 4 days he was back, it's, "Hey, how's your family holding up? Have you got all the arrangements made?" Because he was basically stuck with all that. And so if you take the time and get to know people, the return on investment is massive because when you need help, when you need something, those are the people that are always going to be there for you and they're always going to work tirelessly to make sure that you're successful. The leaders who I go somewhere and they're like, well, this staff, these 4 people over here, they're lazy, they never do anything, and they give me a mile of gripes and complaints every day. The first thing I ask them is, so what have you done to contribute to that? Because I guarantee it's something. Because either they would be in your court or you would have managed them out of the organization by now. So what have you done to contribute to that? And so really staff, it's all about presence. It's all about authenticity. Authenticity is not something you read in a book and you can do. It's not. And I know there's a lot of books out there, a lot of leadership books out there, and a lot of them talk about being an authentic leader. And there's even definitions and things of what an authentic leader is. And I'm here to tell you 99% of those are wrong. That is not authenticity. That is doing what the book tells you to do. That's check box leadership. And so be authentic. Get to know the people that you work with and never make them feel like they work for you because you work for them as the leader. So if you make them feel like you work for them and you work together, you're going to get a lot out of people. You know, it's the same thing as look at the best college football teams in America and then look at the coach. I guarantee that's a coach who is authentic with those players. I mean, take Alabama, for example. Look what happened to them when Nick Saban left. Now, I don't like Nick Saban because I'm a Miami Dolphin fan. So, I'm not going to pretend like I'm a Nick Saban fan, but he got something out of those kids that no one else could. And when he left, that team has gone like straight plummeted in the SEC. And, it's because the person behind the wheel makes the difference.
I could not agree with you more, and I think that is applicable on so many levels. So those are great things to bring up. And it leads us into an interesting point in terms of authority. In your experience as an interim director, interim leader, what are some challenges that you faced? Whether it's, the staff feeling like you may not have that authority because you're not long term, or the risk of being seen as an outsider to the organizations. How
Yeah.
do you navigate that?
So, interesting story. 2 years ago, I went into an organization and the SPD there was just dreadful, absolutely dreadful. And I'm sitting in a meeting with the entire leadership team, and this place was fairly large. And we had about 10 leaders, 10 surgical leaders sitting at the table. And this was my, I guess, third week there. And I said, okay, I want to hear from you guys. Like, how does it make you feel you have a consultant sitting here? And so we go around the room and they're, well, a little apprehension, I'm nervous. I don't know what it holds. What does this mean for our jobs? I got a lot of that, which is normal, but I think you got to talk about those things. And I get to the SPD leader who again, his department was an absolute shambles. He said, "Well, honestly, you being here is a slap in my face." He's like, "I don't want you here. I don't like you. And, I've been saying what needs to be done for the last year and a half, and no one's listened to me." I said, "Okay." I said, That's a very fair statement. I'm sorry you feel that way. I am here to help you. But you know what? Let's talk about what you think needs to be done, and maybe I can help get some of that done for you. But the fact is, your department is not performing. You're failing miserably, and we've got to make it better. And we're not going to make it better with the attitude that you just displayed." So it's a range of emotions from "thank God you're here, we need help" to "I hate you, please leave." And so you have to navigate that, and you have to let everyone have their feelings. I've been on the receiving end of, "Hey, Sean, we're bringing in consultants." Now, it just so happened it was Sullivan's.
Yeah, that's how you came here.
And now I work for them, but I've been on that receiving end, and it doesn't feel good. You start thinking about, how am I a failure? How am I not doing my job correctly? What could I have done differently? I think as an interim leader, especially as a consultant that's doing interim leadership, you have to go into the hospital or surgery center or wherever you're going into and be humble. Yeah, you probably have done a lot more than the people there. You've probably seen a lot more than the people there, but you don't have to go in and throw that around. It's one of my most successful clients. I absolutely love them. And in fact, the leadership team sends me birthday cards, and, they still do that even after, 2 years. I just sat down with them one day and I said, "What do you guys think we need to do about this?" And we put all of their ideas up on a whiteboard. And at the end of it, I looked at it and said, "I agree with 90% of this. This would have been on my action plan. So let's go do this. You think it needs to be done. Let's go do it together." And those type of interactions is what makes the difference, especially as an interim leader. You can't go in knowing everything. You can't be the know-it-all. Although, sometimes you are. Sometimes you know a lot more than the people there, but you still have to be collaborative to a degree, especially
Yeah,
in that leadership.
I think the implementation I'm running, while I'm not there as an interim leader, I also have a leadership background and I can help encourage and
Mhm.
guide and coach. And, one of the first things I did in talking with my counterpart, the periop director, who I think is great, she's doing a phenomenal job. And I
Mhm.
really enjoy working with her. I think one of the first things I said to her was, "I'm not here because you failed or you're failing to do something. I am here because they know you're capable of taking this program the direction it needs to go. And I am here to augment you in that process."
Mhm.
And B, you know, that's the squeaky wheel gets the grease is the old saying. But the way I
Right.
kind of see it in terms of consulting is I can be that squeaky wheel too. The
Right.
difference is that the louder I squeak, the more expensive I get. The longer I squeak, the more
Right.
expensive it becomes. So let me squeak. Let's fix this and get it on the rails. And I think that's just an important perspective to have on
Mhm.
things. And I think yours is great. And you answered that perfectly. In terms of being an interim leader, you're only there for a period of time. How do
Mhm.
you prepare that organization for your eventual replacement?
Mhm.
On the other side of that, how do you prepare your replacement for that organization?
So for me, that starts about a month after I arrive. Whether there's someone on the horizon, whether a position is posted, doesn't matter to me. I start working on my transition plan about a month in. And so the way I do that is I put together all the documents, all the things, because remember, after 30 days, like, we're moving. We know what we're working on. We're moving forward with these things. And so I start preparing all those documents. I normally do, I mean, I'm a PowerPoint guy. I normally do a PowerPoint presentation that says, "Hey, here's all the things still yet to do." But I start working on that transition plan and figuring out what that looks like right away, basically. And so what I like to do is when the new person comes, I want to make sure that I give them the feeling of support that, "Hey, I'm going to be here 2 weeks with you here. Let's go over everything. Let me introduce you to all the people. Let me give you some emotional capital by proxy." And so to set them up for success, I hand walk them through everyone. "Hey, I'm really excited Steven's here. This is your permanent director. He's coming from blah blah blah." I talk a little bit about the background, and although I can't believe I'm saying this and it's being recorded, I use the old Quint Studer tactic. I trained under Quint and his team when I was in a health system in Virginia, and I use the old manage up tactic. Hey, this is Steven. He's got, 10 years in the military. He's been a leader for 24 years. He's going to do a great job here. And, I just want you to know that I fully support him being here because, some leaders sometimes it's kind of funny. You get in a place and you like it a little bit and you want to stay a little while and then boom, somebody's coming to replace you. And you're like, well, maybe I'm not going to give this person everything, but you can't do that. You've got to be very supportive. And I always say, look, I'm really excited and I fully support this person being here. And I'm going to make sure that I give them everything that I know about you, about the organization, about this department, about what we're working on so they can be successful. And then after that, it's about putting together all the documents and all the plans and everything that you've worked on, making sure that they have that and understand it all so they know where you started, where you're at right now. But then one thing that I always do is I leave my final recommendations. These are the items we didn't get to in my time here, or these are the items that we've corrected. But if you do these additional things, it's going to be even better that we didn't have time to do. And so I make sure I do all three of those: the welcoming, the onboarding, the emotional capital with physicians, with anesthesia, with staff, with admin even, and then making sure that they have the details of where we were when I started, where we're at right now, and then the follow-on recommendations for, look, when I leave, here's the other things you need to do.
Yeah, that's a great approach. And look, going back to where you're talking about being excited to introduce the individual replacing you, I think you and I are very similar in the fact that we're both very genuine people. And my wife could attest to the fact that I am completely unable to hide my emotions on my face despite what my brain is recommending. How much input do you have to the organization when it comes to your replacement? Is that something that
Yeah.
you're typically brought in on? Because it's a lot easier to be excited about someone who you know is going to do well in a
Mhm.
position. And when you're
Right.
recommending someone to your audience, to your,
Mhm.
it's your reputation that is validating that. And,
Right.
I wouldn't want to be in a position where my reputation could potentially be at stake for someone that may not be a good fit to that organization, especially if you know that ahead of time. So, really, what steps do you take in helping your organization you're leading pick a good option as your replacement?
Yeah, so, the times that, the times I've been involved in that, I think the most successful places that bring someone in, at least from my perspective, I'm in there from the beginning. I'm helping whatever admin, vice president, CNO, COO, whoever that is, I'm helping them review resumes. I'm offering my opinion on resumes. I'm part of the interview process. And then I'm a pretty significant part of the onboarding process as well. I even go as far as, once a candidate is chosen, I reach out to them before their arrival. Hey, look, do you have any questions? What can I get ready for you? Is there anything you're going to want to see day one just to try to make them successful? But yeah, I think as an interim leader, you need to be involved in that because you've been there day to day. You know what the challenges have been. You know what the successes are. And honestly, for me, I'm not saying I'm the best leader by any stretch of the imagination. I've worked with leaders that are far, far better than I am. But I want to leave the organization and the people there, the staff, the patients, the physicians. I want to leave them with someone that is at least as good as I am, preferably better. And so, I want to be part of that interviewing process, that screening of resumes, all of those things. And so far, I've had success with that.
I have no doubts. As we're looking at wrapping this up, what are some indicators to an organization's leadership, be it C suite, president, vice president level? What are some indications that they may be in a good position to pursue interim leadership in these very difficult to hire for positions?
Right. So, one of the main ones is how long has a position been open? If it's open, how long has it been open and you've been unsuccessful at filling that position? Another one is, you've got a current leader there and everything feels like it's collapsing around you and that leader is struggling or not managing, or, that leader comes to you and says, "Look, I'm overwhelmed. I need help." I was actually in an administrative position, and one of my directors came to me and said, "Look, I'm overwhelmed here. Like, I can't keep up with all of this." And I actually brought in Sullivan at that point. I brought in an interim leader from Sullivan to help her out. And so, it's really being in tune with how's your operations going? Are you meeting the benchmarks? Are you meeting your volume targets? Physician satisfaction, staff engagement, all of those things. Are you meeting those? Do you have a revolving door of staff? What's your turnover look like? Because all of those things are direct indicators of how your leadership is performing. And I'm not saying necessarily your leader needs to be replaced, but maybe they need some leadership development. And that is something that has kind of gone by the wayside in America now. There's not a lot of organizations doing real leadership development. And, I go into places like, for an example, one place I went into, I had 9 surgical services leaders, 7 of them had less than a year of experience. And when I said, okay, what kind of leadership development have you had? I got blank stares. And so I think if organizations truly want to be successful, we have to invest in the leadership. And sometimes that means bringing in a consulting interim leader to either bolster your leadership team, help develop your leadership team, or simply replace your leadership team sometimes. And so, there's all of those scenarios. But really, as an administrative person, VP, president, whatever that is, you know the operations of the OR. How are you performing? How are things going? What's the satisfaction and engagement like? And are your leaders struggling? Because all of those things are indicators that maybe it's time to give someone like us a call and see if we can help you out.
Yeah, I think those are excellent points. All right, I got one more question for you.
Okay.
You've made it this far into the episode, and I appreciate you
Woohoo!
hanging on. And if anyone's still listening, thanks for being here. So, in keeping with our namesake, the perioperative playbook, I'd love to know what a play out of your playbook is when, as an interim leader in an OR or in perioperative services. What's one thing that you know you can do that increases your chances for success?
Is it okay if I give you two?
Yes, absolutely. I'll
Okay.
take two.
So, number one is when you're entering an organization as an interim leader, know the priorities. Talk with, like I said in the beginning, I like to work that first week before I get there. Get to know what that leader that's bringing you in, what that CEO, COO, president, whatever that person's title is, get to know what they see the priorities as and get to know what they want you to accomplish. Because if you know that, you can stay on the same page, you can have clear expectations, and part of that is setting expectations. If they want you to completely fire everyone and start over, it's like, hold on a minute, I can't do that for you. you know
I'm
um
not the Grim Reaper.
yeah, who's going to do the surgery?
Yeah.
But, know the priorities, set the expectations, both the client to you and you to the client as to what's gonna go on, and, you know, that's a good time to talk about timeframes too. Like, I was brought into an organization to help fix the revolving door of staff and to build a better recruitment and retention system for surgical services, and I'm like, here's the thing, that takes 3 months. That is not something I'm gonna come in and next week that's gonna be fixed, and so just setting those expectations, knowing the priorities, that's number one. And then from a staff side, I've already mentioned it, you just have to be present. I think it's one of the simplest things a leader can do. But for me, in my travels, in my time in the industry, it's probably the number one thing that leaders get wrong. You just have to be present. You've got to know your people. You got to know what's going on. Don't be afraid to pick up a mop. It's not going to hurt you. I promise. Because your staff will see you, you'll be present. And when you pick up a mop in an operating room and you're the director, now I'm not saying, look, let me back up for a second. I'm not saying a director should be mopping the floor. I'm not saying that should happen every day. But when your team is challenged, you're short staffed one day, they need a little extra help. If you go back there and pick up a mop, you have changed that staff's world and their perception of leadership will never be the same.
I couldn't agree more. The first periop director in the first hospital I ever worked in, Nancy Palmer, she was notorious for if we're backlogged and we're needing some hands on turnovers,
Hmm.
she'd be the first one in there, mop in hand, wiping lights, getting
Hmm.
rooms turned over. And, that was, as someone who was, I think, 18 years old at the time, that was something that was super critical for, my development of a leadership perspective on things. So
Hmm.
I will always remember Nancy Palmer grabbing a mop. And on that note, Shawn, thanks for coming by and recording this with me today.
Yeah,
I'm
dude.
really
Thank you for
excited to
having
get
me.
this episode out there. And, if anyone has any questions or wants to reach out and continue the conversation, please email us info@sullivanhealthcareconsulting.com and we will get back with you immediately. Thanks again to everyone listening, and I hope everybody has a great day.
All right. Thank you, Stephen.